troubling news tonight with the Albanese Government likely to resume funding UNRWA, the UN Relief and Works Agency that has projects in Palestine areas of Gaza and the West Bank. UNRWA is, of course, the same group that had their funding frozen by Australia and 16 other nations after serious allegations emerged that some UNRWA staff had participated in the October 7 terror attacks on Israel. At this stage, Penny Wong's office is yet to confirm that the funding will resume, but off-the-record sources are saying that moves are being made behind the scenes that will make Australia follow the lead of Canada and Sweden in reinstating UNRWA funding. Now, no doubt this will appeal to many within Labor who never agreed with the freeze in the first place, but this is bad news for those who know the troubled history of UNRWA that began long before October 7. For more on this, I'm joined now by the President of the Australian Jewish Association, David Adler. Well, we know that Canada, David, and Sweden are resuming funding. Is this putting pressure on Labor, or is this happening internally inside Labor factions who we know, many of them, did not support the freeze in the first place?
Peter, I'm absolutely certain that Labor wants to put more money into UNRWA. It's sort of something close to their hearts, and the evidence of this is that shortly after the Labor government was elected, one of the first actions of Foreign Minister Penny Wong was to double the funding to UNRWA. She's further increased it significantly since the 7th of October. But herein is a really interesting issue for the coalition to use for the next election, because regardless of one's knowledge or interest in Middle East politics, and I accept that most Aussies would not have a lot of interest in it, they do not want our money going anywhere near terrorism. They don't want us involved in the training or funding of murderers, kidnappers, rapists, jihadists, etc. And UNRWA and Hamas have been shown to be closely integrated, and if you give money to UNRWA, it is very close to giving money to Hamas.
Well, I agree with that, and that's certainly the view of US intelligence agency about the links between UNRWA staff and the October 7 atrocities. But there's also a formal investigation into all of the links between UNRWA and Hamas more broadly. Now, surely we've got to wait for this investigation and the reporting to happen before we could put another dollar into this body.
Well, we've got to be very cautious about UNRWA investigating itself. Within the last week, Israel has identified another 450 UNRWA employees who are terrorists. They've shared that information with the United States and the United Nations. There is the physical evidence of Hamas using UNRWA facilities for all sorts of purposes. And it's a great shame that Penny Wong, when she visited Israel, did not actually go down to the south to see the physical evidence. Maybe if she was better informed, she wouldn't be in such a hurry to turn on the money tap back to UNRWA.
Look, there's intelligence things I know in my former life working inside government that I can't share publicly, but let's say the proof's in the pudding. The coalition government pulled back money to UNRWA and Labor has very rapidly increased that money to UNRWA. Trust me,
Exactly.
There's a lot there behind the organisation. Let's go to those disturbing scenes yet again that emerged over the weekend. This anti-Semitism, again in a Sydney mosque, this time in Western Sydney. It was filmed a little way back in February, but it's horrific. The Imam described Jews as a criminal, barbaric, tyrannical enemy and demanded Palestine be restored through jihad. Have a listen.
وعادت الشعوب مرة أخرى تناكف اليهود وتتكلم عن صهيونيتهم وعدائهم وقتلهم وعدم رحمتهم للخلق وأنهم عدو مجرم متوحش صائل ظالم تعدى على أرض الناس وبغى عليهم.
David, we're tying ourselves in knots about what Sam Kerr said to a white police officer in London, yet we're watching this play out in a mosque in Sydney, horrific talk of jihad. How on earth is this allowed?
Well, it shouldn't be allowed, and it's certainly not Australian. And it incites hatred and violence. I can't tell you the number of threats that the Jewish community has received over the last few months. I've personally received threats, including death threat, and the community broadly has had to increase security. I had a meeting with counter-terrorism police, and we had a really interesting discussion, and one of the questions I asked was, we know where most of these threats are coming from, and unfortunately they're coming from the more radical end of the Islamic community in Australia. Has there been any threats arising out of the Jewish community towards the Islamic community? And their answer was zero. This is a one-way street. This is a serious problem. We need much, much better leadership and strength from government. France, where this has got further out of hand, is now closing down some of the more radical mosques and expelling some of the more radical imams. I have little doubt that Australia will come to that point if it doesn't rein it in and take action very, very soon. This is ridiculous, and I don't think the majority of Australians would want that sort of racial vilification occurring in our country.
No, we don't, David. We should be shutting them down and deporting them here in Australia too, as you're right to point out they are doing in France. Thank you for your time, David Adler there from the Jewish Association President.